So that means normally when I tell a story, I'll embellish it with some details for the enjoyment and entertainment of the crowd. But tonight, I'm going to be a historian. And as such, I'm going to stick strictly to the facts. Now, you all are familiar with the term cracker. Florida cracker, Georgia cracker. Those are people whose families go back generations, 5, 6, 7 generations or more in Florida. Now, some say that the origin of this term was from the crack of the whip of the cowmen as they drove their cattle along. But some historians note that the term originated or goes back as far as William Shakespeare's time. A cracker is a braggart, a boaster, a ne'er-do-well. So that term does not have some good connotations. And in the 1700s, about the middle 1700s, there was a large influx of immigrants to the United States, and a lot of them were Scottish and Irish immigrants coming to the southern colonies, and the English there did not give them a warm welcome. They called them crackers. And they would refer to them and their descendants in the Florida and Georgia region as crackers, sort of dismissive. But whatever the true origin, there can be no question that crackers are an important part of the state's rich, colorful history. And those who know that the greatest of all Florida crackers was a man named Cracker Jack. Now, Cracker Jack grew up in the wild, woolly days of Florida back in the early 1800s. The Everglades was his playground. And when he became a man, he became a cattleman, a cowman. And he was the biggest cowman in all of Florida in two ways. One, he was a head taller and broader than any man around. And secondly, his herd was numbered in the tens of thousands, and he knew them all by name. Now, his herd was so large that they threatened to dry up all the watering holes from Kissimmee up to Ocala. Now, Jack was nothing if not a good neighbor, and he did not want to put his fellow cowmen in bad straits, so he decided to dig his own watering hole. So he took a shovel, and he started digging, and he dug and dug all summer long. He dug a hole miles wide, and the summer rains filled it all in, so finally he had a watering hole big enough for his whole herd. Now, folks around the area called it Jack's watering hole. The Indians had a different name for it. They called it Okeechobee, and that's the name we call use for it today. Now, one day Jack was tending his herd around his old watering hole, and he was looking for his favorite bull, George. George didn't wander very far from the herd, and that was strange. So he looked high and low. He looked all over for this cow, this bull of his. Finally, he saw it in the jaws of an enormous black bear. The bear had George by the scruff of his neck, the loose folds, and the bull was scrabbling with his huge hooves trying to reach the ground as the bear lumbered along on all four paws. But it was so big that the bull couldn't reach the ground. It was helpless, like a little toy. Now, Jack, he'd wrestled bears before, but nothing this big. He wasn't about to tackle it head on. So he jumped up into the trees when the bear started going into the woods. He knew he had to get George back before the bear got George to his den and made him his dinner. So Jack was up in the trees, leaping from branch to branch till he got over the bear, and then he jumped down and grabbed onto the back of that bear, and his plan worked. The bear was startled. He dropped George, and George thundered off into the safety of the herd. But as you can understand, Jack didn't have time to really think this plan all the way through. And that bear just took off and running, okay? And Jack was hanging on for dear life. He didn't want to let go because he was afraid to be slammed into a tree and killed instantly. The bear had no such worries. It just ran into anything in its path. Boulders, trees, sago palms, everything just went splintering before it, and it tore through the middle of the state, up through Georgia, through the Carolinas. It didn't slow down until it got to Maine, so finally Jack jumped off. And he looked back and saw the carnage behind him, this wide swath through the forest. And he thought it was a mess, but little did he know, for years, people would use that as like a highway, up and down along the Appalachian Mountains. It was very useful. And then later, see where I'm going with this? The U.S. Forestry Service thought it'd be a nice hiking trail, so they've kept it up ever since. But Jack wasn't worried about that. He was worried about how to get home. He was thousands of miles from home, from his beloved Florida. He smelled the salt air, so he thought he'd head east. He had to get a boat from a fisherman. But of course, you're not going to give away a boat to some stranger in town. Now Jack, seeing as how he didn't realize when he got up that morning he would need to buy a boat up in Maine, didn't think to bring his wallet with him when he went out to tend his herd. Well, with nothing more to do, he waded into the water and he pulled out a sunken boat And he patched up with some of his chewing tobacco and some bits of wood and clumps of stuff until he got it floating in the harbor, but he needed a sail. Now, as all good crackers, he carries a bandana with him. So he took that off and he unfolded it, and he unfolded it, and he unfolded it again until he had a big enough piece of material for a mast, for a sail, which he lashed to the mast. And off he went, down the eastern seaboard. Did pretty good for a man who's never been in a boat before. And pretty soon he saw St. Augustine, he saw the fort there, San Castillo, and he knew he was close to home. He kept going a little farther down the coast and figured he'd start to put in, when wouldn't you know it, a hurricane came along. A whomper of a hurricane. A category like 8 or 9, okay? And at the time, Florida was sort of pointing this way towards Africa, and this storm slammed into the state so hard it straightened it out until it was pointing straight down, and it scooped Jack up in his little boat and spun him around 300 miles an hour until it flung him loose. And Jack thought this might work out pretty well. So you see, he could see his homestead, saw it go past, and he's heading towards the bottom of the state, heading towards the tip of Florida, until he slams into it with such force that he broke it into pieces. And they went floating off a little bit farther south of the tip of Florida until they settled to where they are now, and people like to go there and they call them Florida Keys. Well, Jack was sure sorry he broke the state. He swore he'd come back one day and fix it, put it right. But for now he just wanted to get home, and he realized this is a short walk through the Everglades and he'd be home. Now, Jack lived for many years and had many more historical, however undocumented, adventures. But unfortunately, I don't have time to tell them all to you tonight. But I hope you enjoyed this adventure, this history, and learned something about the greatest cracker in the history of Florida, Cracker Jack.